Welcome to the Clear to Close podcast with your host, local mortgage expert Ryan Bolton. Ryan has the questions and answers, tips and tricks, do's and don'ts, and expert guests to explain all the steps needed to buy or sell real estate. And now it's time for the Clear to Close podcast.
Hey everyone, Ryan here. I am a mortgage nerd. Welcome to the Clear to Close podcast. Today I've got a very special guest with us. I've got Tammy Houchen with Red Rock Realty. She's also the president of the Washington County Board of Realtors. And there's a lot of talk and a lot of things going on in the mortgage and real estate world when it comes to real estate commissions. So I thought I needed to bring in the expert. So I brought in Tammy to kind of talk about what's going on, how it affects the real estate specifically in the state of Utah, because it is a little different with how they're already ahead of the curve in many ways. But I wanted to bring in an expert and kind of get to the bottom of it. So Tammy, I really appreciate you coming on the show and tell everybody a little about you, how you've been in the industry, how long you've been in St. George, just kind of give everybody an idea why you're in real estate.
Sure. Well, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me here on your podcast. I've never done this before, so This will be interesting. I have been in the real estate industry since 2005. I had the opportunity to be part of the administrative staff at Prudential Real Estate. I hope some of you remember that out there. And I had a great opportunity to learn the business from the inside out. And so when I did decide to get my real estate license, I felt like I really had a good step ahead than most realtors do. And so, yes, now I'm the principal broker at Red Rock Real Estate, president of Washington County Board of Realtors. And I moved here in 2003. My husband was born and raised here. And so we wanted to finish raising our kids here. So that's why. Yeah. Yeah,
and it's something I see people that work in transaction coordinating or some other parts of the business. They usually do have a little bit different grasp on the ins and outs of the business side of things.
Yes.
And so that makes it pretty interesting. What made you decide to become the president of the board? Is it something where they nominate you, or is it something where you wanted to be in that role? Because you're already a principal broker at Red Rock Real Estate, which has how many agents now? You've got to be at
350.
350 agents.
Yes.
It's got to be the biggest in Southern Utah, right? I think it's the biggest brokerage in Southern Utah.
Yes.
And they really have recruited really well. It's got a really good reputation. Red Rock's kind of that homegrown kind of real estate firm.
Yeah.
So is it something where they invite you to become the president kind of thing or vote you in, or is it something where you get nominated by somebody?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Obviously, you want to be in leadership.
Yes.
They're certainly not going to put somebody in that position that doesn't want to be there. But yes, I had a few people encourage me and not nominate, because at that point the process wasn't a nominating process. It was they wanted people to come forward that wanted to lead. And so I felt like, since I've had such a great almost 20-year career, and it was something I've never done before, that I felt this would be a perfect opportunity for me to give back and to just have the experience of being leader of our realtor family and making a difference out there.
That's great.
I had no idea that my year was going to be the settlement year.
Yeah.
So it's been fun. It's been interesting. It's been hard, but I've loved every minute of it.
So you're handling not only 350 agents within your brokerage, so you see the good, the bad, and the ugly that happens in the real estate world, and how to handle those issues that happen. Because when something goes wrong in real estate, it's usually a big deal. You're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, buyers and sellers, lenders, title. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong with these things, and also helping with the entire board in general. How many Washington County agents do we have? You have 350 at your brokerage, but how many total in Washington County?
We fluctuate between 2,200 to 2,400 at one time. Obviously, board dues are coming up. They're due October 1st. So we do see a little bit of fluctuation during that time. And we're kind of interested to know how that's going to affect numbers with everything that's been going on.
Because that's really where you find out who's sticking in the business, who's going to deal with the issues that change. We saw it in the mortgage industry when 2008 happened, and all the regulation and licensing and all that kind of stuff kind of thinned the herd a little bit of the people that were on the edge of retiring or maybe looking at doing other things or just didn't want to deal with all the changes that were happening. So that's really what I wanted to bring you in. You're seeing kind of how this is starting to play out, how it's been talked about and discussed in your industry now since this whole NAR lawsuit and everything. And there's still some things I think happen in November with NAR, but Utah and everybody, that August 16th is when things really started to kind of change. But Utah was already different, if you can explain on how the contract and how it was already working. It was a little ahead of this curve, but how does it affect Utah and agents, especially here in Washington County?
Yes, I I am proud to be part of Utah Association of Realtors. Utah was or is one of 18 states that were actually using a buyer-broker agency agreement. So you think about all those other states out there that were not using buyer-broker agency agreements, which I can't even imagine. They're the ones that are probably having the hardest time because they're having to implement new forms and learning how to use them and learning how to explain it to their buyers. Whereas Utah, we've been using it for ever, as far as I know.
Right.
And so that part was easy.
Yeah, and it only changed maybe one line. I remember when the new real estate contract came out, it was a paragraph, not even a paragraph. It was like, that's it.
Yeah.
Because like you said, so much of it already was kind of out there and circulating.
Right.
You're just making little tweaks to it.
Right. So with the change, we have the opportunity in Washington County to raise our standards. And I would encourage all realtors to look at it that way, that we have an opportunity to raise our standards, to be more transparent with our customers, clients, buyers, and sellers, and to be better at educating and explaining the contracts, explaining all of our forms, and explain our value, most importantly. Right now, there's sellers thinking that, oh, now I don't have to pay a buyer agent compensation. And there's buyers thinking, I can't afford to pay a buyer agent, so I'm just going to go unrepresented. Well, that could be one way you could handle it. Sellers, yes, do not have to pay a buyer agent compensation, but we as agents need to explain why it would be in their best interest to offer a buyer agent compensation. And for buyers, if they're afraid that they're going to be on the hook for paying their buyer agent, again, it's our responsibility to explain that agency agreement. Yes, that agency agreement says that you agree to pay us, but it's our job as their representation to go to bat for them and to negotiate so that they're not held responsible for paying our broker compensation.
So is it still something where on the listing side, is it still something where the listing agent negotiates a commission and it still is a split, or is it something where now it's a completely different thing, or is it still kind of the same as what it was? It's just maybe a different number that is negotiated out of that commission with the agent. So is the negotiation more with the buyer and the seller agents, or is it more with the seller and the buyer of the home?
It's both.
Okay.
So as a listing agent, you negotiate with your seller what your fee is for your services as the listing agent. That's separate now. Okay. And then in addition to that listing agreement, you give the seller an opportunity as to whether he wants to offer a buyer brokerage compensation, and that is listed there as well. He can choose not to pay any buyer brokerage compensation, or he can say, well, yes, I'm willing to pay X amount for a buyer brokerage compensation. Or he could say, let's not put anything in here. Let's wait until we get an offer and negotiate it from there.
Okay.
And with that, the new real estate purchase contract allows us to negotiate the buyer brokerage compensation right there in the contract. So it is negotiated between buyer and seller now. I know that years back that was always taboo, putting commissions into the real estate purchase contract. But now, because of the settlement and because of the DOJ, they want everything transparent, above board, and negotiated in the contract. So I feel like I'm excited about it.
So on the MLS, do they actually post what the commission is for the? Because I remember before they'd actually list kind of the compensation and the splits. Is that now not allowed on there anymore?
That is not allowed. That was part of the NAR settlement practice change. Was that
So as a buyer's agent, you don't know what commission the seller has negotiated ahead of time if there is any kind of split. So it's just once you go into the negotiation on price, you're also negotiating now on compensation in some way.
That's one way of doing it.
Okay.
In answer to your first question, no. The part of the settlement practice changes that buyer brokerage compensation had to be removed from the MLS, and it could not be advertised anywhere that was directly connected to the MLS. The places you can advertise buyer brokerage compensation include flyers, signs.
Yep. Okay.
You can put it on your own personal website. You can put it on social media, things like that. Buyer agents always can call the listing agent ahead of time and ask, is your seller offering a buyer brokerage compensation? And if they say, yes, they're offering X amount, then you know that. You'll want to send over a special form getting that in writing if you choose to do it that way. The listing agent may say, yes, he's offering, but I have not been authorized to tell you how much. Just put it in the real estate purchase contract if you choose to write an offer, which is, another way to do it. So that way you either have your agreement ahead of time, knowing what the seller is going to pay that buyer brokerage compensation, and you can go back to your buyer and say, okay, this is how much they're offering, so you're off the hook, or there's still a 0.5% difference that we'll need to negotiate, or you can just write it into the offer.
So as you've seen this play out, what do you think the most common complaint from agents has been, or with the board? Are you starting to see any kind of complaints upticking with buyers and sellers? I mean, is it still, because like you said, there's not a wrong or right way quite to do it, and that's what's interesting about your industry. It's a little different than ours. When they make a change to ours, boy, it is pretty ironclad of what we're supposed to do, and we're kind of more stuck with it. We can't go back and say, well, we don't want a 3-day waiting period on this, or we don't want this form to have to be signed. It's just kind of, here it is, and it's a little more almost set in stone on what we have to do on our side, where your guy, they say, well, you can't do that anymore, figure out the rest.
Yeah.
So that's really an interesting way to see, are you seeing one of these things that's going to be more likely that's going to kind of play out, or are you seeing what complaints people are having? Are you seeing buyer agents just getting totally stiffed yet with the fact that not worked in, you don't get any money? What are you kind of seeing so far that's been the biggest problem with implementing this?
I think it's the learning curve. And I'm one of them, but realtors do not like change. They just put their heels in the ground sometimes and think that, who moved the cheese, so to speak, right? Okay. So that's been my experience, is just trying to talk agents off the ledge, so to speak, and tell them this is not that big of a deal. Nothing's really changed other than the compensation's been removed, and that you have to have a written agreement before you show a home to a buyer, which is something we can talk about in a minute. And I feel, as members of Washington County, I feel like we're all on the same page. We're all in for the same purpose, to help buyers and sellers achieve, their dreams, whether it be buying or selling a home. And we understand that this is how we get paid. So I think for the most part, listing agents are going to be great at educating their sellers and encouraging them to offer a buyer brokerage compensation.
And I think in our industry, we had the good faith estimates, went to CDs and LEs, all this kind of stuff. There's a lot more upfront with the clients, a lot more transparency, a lot more locking in your fees. It wasn't something where you got a loan estimate, went to closing, it was totally different. I think that's happened in your industry as well. There's a lot of times people didn't maybe fully know what the fees and commissions and broker and all this kind of stuff until they got to closing. And by that point, they're trying to move in, they've moved out. It's almost they had a term in our industry called slam them in the booth. If you just get them in the booth at the title company, they're probably just going to sign, which is a horrible practice. And that's why a lot of the regulations change that. And I feel like you guys are having a similar thing where a lot more of this is up front. Let's negotiate it, figure it out up front what we're dealing with, instead of kind of at the end where then people are going, whoa, and they look at the settlement statement and go, holy cow, what's this fee? What's this fee? What's this fee? It's way better to have all that done up front, negotiated, transparent, so then the process moves past that to not so much the money side of it. Let's get you in the house. Let's start doing due diligence. Let's do appraisal. Let's do all those things. So it's interesting to see how it does play out. It's the first thing I've ever seen in your industry that really has put such a spotlight on the commission side of things.
And I'll say that the process hasn't changed. It's always been there. But now, like I said, we now have the opportunity to raise the standard, because everything that's in the settlement, everything that they're asking us to do, is something that we should have already been doing. But there were some of those realtors, wherever, that weren't doing it. And that's kind of how we got into this lawsuit in the first place.
Right. Well, and I always saw that when there was the commissions and there was the splits, all the money wasn't going to the listing agent and then to the buyer's agent. They were able to split it right there at the title company. And I think that was one of the things the lawsuit was able to say is like, okay, you guys are not handling the accounting and the stuff that happens with that initial 6% going to this listing agent, then broken up because the brokerages didn't want to have to do all the payroll and counting of all the agents in town. They said, oh, just have the title company cut 2 checks. And that, I think, was one of the big things that opened the door to say, well, wait a minute, the seller's paying for both sides. There really isn't a chance to negotiate the person I'm paying that's negotiating against me, and that's what started, I think, the whole thing. I was amazed to see that it took hold and it's had such an effect. Are you seeing anything on the NAR side of things? I mean, they're having to pay a lot of money. I keep hearing stuff about people not renewing and not becoming part of NAR. There's even a couple of these smaller ones that are starting to kind of open up, maybe as a replacement for NAR. Do you see a future for NAR, or is it something where it's going to be closed, or is it just too early to tell?
I feel like that's why they took the settlement. To protect themselves and to protect the majority of its members too. I am a supporter of NAR. Okay. I think that they do a lot of good, and I think during times like this, when the spotlight's on them, people tend to forget. You know, you can do all these great things, and then you do one bad thing, and then all those good things get canceled out. And I think that it's not over. I think we're going to probably see some more changes or maybe some more tweaks to practices or forms or things like that. But I don't think NAR is going anywhere. Right. And that's just Tammy Houchen's opinion. And
it's got to be, 100 years, 108 years or something. NAR's been around. It's been one of the largest lobbyist group, one of the largest support of an industry group. Like, our industry is not even nearly as closely well-run and organized and under kind of a unified thing, because I think agents have to work a little more with each other because they're representing kind of both sides, working both sides, where mortgage people are very much in a competitive environment where we never talk or see other mortgage companies, which I always thought was a downside of the industry. But the same with, like, car sales guys. They're not necessarily going across the street and say, hey, how are your sales going this month? You know what I mean? So it is a little bit different industry with real estate agents and the sense. Do you see that this is going to push more of agents into the listing side, more listing agents, and more? Because that's, I hear probably the most is buyers agents are the most worried about this, because listing agents are going to still get the listings. They're still going to create that inventory. It's the buyers agents, I think, are the ones that are maybe the most uncertain or scared in a way.
Well, my advice is, if you're doing your job, you won't have to worry, whether you're a listing agent or a buyer agent. Buyers will always need representation, especially first-time home buyers. Who in their right mind would want to make the biggest purchase of their life all by themselves?
Right.
You know, that's where we come in and explain our value and help them understand our value and all the things that we do for them to avoid stress or making mistakes and, you know, overspending or paying too much for something. There will always be a need for buyer representation.
Yep.
If you're a listing agent, great. You know, it is a little bit, it didn't really affect listing agents as much as it did the buyer agents. I get that. But there's plenty of business out there. There's plenty of buyers and plenty of sellers. So we all just need to cooperate.
Yeah.
So.
And I agree. I've always said, use a real estate agent. They deal with these transactions day in and day out. They see the pitfalls. They see the mistakes that get made. And it's so important to have somebody on your side negotiating this stuff. So I've always been a big believer that you have to have that as part of the system. And even on the listing side, it's funny, when the for sale by owners, they'll get way more calls from unscreened borrowers. They'll get way more lower balled offers because they said, well, you're not paying an agent, you're not represented, so I'm just going to come in with a lower offer. So I think the value of a real estate agent is absolutely there. And this will force people to maybe shop that a little bit more.
Yes.
So what other notes do you have here? You have a couple other things you want to talk about?
Well, the other thing that was part of the practice changes is that buyer agents now have to have some sort of written agreement before they show a buyer a home. And that written agreement can be in the form of the buyer-broker agency agreement, which is the preferred form that we would encourage realtors to get. But as we all know, some buyers, upon your first meeting, aren't ready to commit to you, and you may not be ready to commit to them. You kind of want to, see if you guys get along and see if you'll be a good fit for the transaction relationship. So Washington County Board of Realtors has developed what's called a limited showing agreement. And it's basically just that. It's just an agreement. It clearly states that you are a customer, not a client. The only fiduciary responsibilities owed is honesty. If the buyer down the road wants more fiduciary responsibilities or wants to write an offer or wants representation, then a separate buyer agency agreement will be signed at that point. And so I think it gives that buyer options. And that was another part of the settlement, is to give our buyers options and things that are always negotiable. So rather than having to hook them right into that marriage certificate, so to speak, you can have like a little dating one over here. So that's been good.
Yeah. And that's amazing how much you guys have stayed on top of being able to have those forms ready to go. The state's always been really good at creating the forms. And because, again, they're seeing all the experiences. They're seeing the good, the bad, the ugly. And they're saying, okay, what do we do in this case? Well, we have to add the rule. We had the same thing in the mortgage industry. Was like, okay, now that we're starting to figure this stuff out, they create a law, then they have to start creating the rules at what happens in this case, what happens in this case, what happens in this case. And so you guys are in that very early stage of figuring out, okay, what's going to happen. Now, when it comes to the compensation of the buyer's agent, is it still now separately split up at the title company, or is it still something where, okay, still the commissions are negotiated on the listing side, it goes all of the listing agent and then to the buyer's agent, or is it something where it's kind of two separate agreements?
Yeah, it's been two separate checks, or so to speak, for a while now. But it's clearly marked in the purchase contract and in your agency agreements now.
And I've also seen an uptick in you have the commission that's negotiated. Now I'm starting to see a big uptick in broker fees or archival fees. I've heard of a couple different names there. Does that have any effect with the NAR disclosure or anything you have to do there? And is that just buyer and seller side, or both? Is it more just the brokerage fee?
It's just a brokerage
fee.
But we at Red Rock we haven't changed those at all. It's the same.
I've seen that increase. I've seen it was played with a little bit as a smaller amount for archival and just for doc, and maybe a transaction coordinator's built into there, or just holding on to documents and stuff like that. I've started to see that kind of fee change and adjust, and maybe just with overhead and cost of things, and or more services at different brokerages and stuff like that. But that's just something that's upfront with on top of any kind of commission that's negotiated.
Right.
Okay.
Another thing with those buyer agency agreements is that we are no longer allowed to accept more commission than what's been agreed on in our buyer agency agreement. So that's something new. And that's been an adjustment, because even with listing agents, if they charged before settlement, they would say, okay, my fee is 6%, and out of that 6%, I'm going to share 3%. I shouldn't say percent, sorry, out there, to the buyer agent. And say that listing agent ends up representing both sides, or maybe you have an unrepresented buyer, that listing agent would still take the 6%, or the fee that they agreed on.
Okay.
Now it's split. So if listing agent's getting a certain amount and buyer agent's getting a certain amount, they can't take any more than what's been agreed on in their agency agreement.
Okay. It's funny. I recently just had that experience where the title company had made an error on the percentages or whatever, and all of a sudden a check was ready at the title company, and I went in there. I'm like, he calls me up and says, "Hey, there's a refund. I figure it's prorations or a couple days of interest or just whatever it was. Maybe some title fees or some adjustments." I go in there and it's a significant check, and I'm like, "Oh, what's this?" So we made the mistake. They refunded the difference, and I don't think I would have caught that. That's something where I was like, well, I've signed, it was done. This was a while ago too. I had no reason to go back and look and see where the commission's right or all that kind of stuff. I just saw the bottom line and went through it all. Yeah. Now maybe it makes me think I should go back and maybe look at some of the other ones I've sold, make sure, well, I wonder if there's ever a mistake on what was done, just because so many of those things are just kind of templated and just, okay, these are percentages. So I thought it was pretty interesting to not only show that integrity, to be able to say, okay, hey, yep, there was a mistake. Too much money was collected. Here's the money back, because they easily could have just kept it. The check could have just come into the brokerage and, okay, here's the splits, here's the thing, just moving on, not realizing to check it and say, oh, whoops, we got too much.
Well, I love to hear things like that.
Yeah. It's such an important part of the business, because like you said, a lot of times you only hear the negative, you only hear the bad stuff, especially when you have such a national thing where you have this whole idea, and you get the memes and all the stuff out there that the brokerage world is collapsing, buyer agents are collapsing, and a lot of that's reactionary, and most people are going to get through it, especially the professionals. But it also is a screening process. It does allow people to say, okay, are you in this business to do one transaction a year, one every 2 years?
Right.
Is it something where we got to professionalize it that much more? Because that's one thing, the cost of entry into real estate is probably one of the lowest for the potential that it can generate.
That is true.
But it's also a lot of people that you are self-employed, you're out on your own, marketing, you have to handle bookkeeping, you got to handle a lot more as an agent than you would any other type of business as well.
That's right.
But so you're saying the renewals, is that every once a year in Washington County? Is it in CE? Have you seen any kind of uptick or downtick in people taking the CE classes to kind of get an idea if there will be a lowering of renewals?
No,
Nope.
I haven't seen anything like that. What I have seen is from my brokerage standpoint, I have seen more and more brand new agents getting their license and coming in and wanting to get it in real estate. And that just amazes me, knowing, everything that's going on in the industry. I think, why would you want to get in now? But on the other hand, this would be the best time for a new agent to start, because they're not having to relearn anything.
Right.
They haven't developed those habits that they have a hard time changing and learning new tricks, so to speak. So
yeah, I remember the same thing
can see
happened with
that.
us with the new regulations. They just were born into it kind of thing,
Right.
where all the old fellas had to figure out, okay, wait, when do we have to sign it? And the CD period is later, then the LE can't go on the same day and all this stuff. And the other kids are like, okay, this is just how you do it.
Yeah.
So it is kind of funny how that will wean out some people and bring in a new flesh blood of professionals that are coming
Yeah.
in at that time. So also, let's just talk real briefly about Washington County. How do you feel about the market? There's a lot of talk about whether houses are going down. People are waiting to buy and sell. What do you feel about Washington County specifically? Not just a nationwide, but what do you think about St. George?
Well, I think our market is strong in Washington County. Our inventory is up. And I feel, as far as the election goes, there's always going to be those people that say, oh, I want to wait until after the
Wait and see
election
yours.
to do
Yeah.
anything. And statistics show for the last 8 to 9 years, the elections have not affected the housing market. So I just want to let all those buyers and sellers know out there that if you're sitting waiting, don't wait. There's no reason to.
Well, that's what I tell people, that people want to wait for a particular interest rate. But if everybody's waiting for that interest rate and there's limited inventory, then there's going to be kind of a run on that inventory again, and then prices are going to go up. So maybe you'll save on your rate, but now you'll pay $50,000 more for the house.
Right.
Where if you get it now, you get to take advantage of that appreciation. You can always refinance if rates get better.
Sure.
So there's a saying that I always use with my clients: the best time to buy real estate was 6 months ago.
Yeah.
The next best
Right.
time is right now.
Is right now.
Because it is
Exactly.
something where there's always going to be something change. Guidelines, underwriting things change, availability of funds, interest rates, all those things. And a quarter difference in rate isn't make it as much of a difference as 10 or 20 or 30 grand more in the price.
Right.
And if the house is available that works and fits and all that, get it. Because it's also more of an inventory issue that we're going to have here in Southern Utah. And it's so discovered with golf courses and Ironmans and all this stuff. There's a lot of people who have discovered Southern Utah.
Yes.
And it's such an incredible place to live. That's not going away.
Nope.
And so it is something that I think it's a really strong market in Southern Utah just because of how well discovered it was. Well,
I agree.
I really appreciate you coming on, shedding
Thank
some
you.
insight on the Clear to Close podcast here. I thought that was great. And if you have any, give them your phone number, website. How do they reach you or reach one of your agents? I don't know. Are you actually listing and actively doing homes? Or with
Yeah.
everything that you're trying to do, you've got to deal with a lot of stuff.
Red Rock Real Estate, the office number is 435-275-2775.
Okay, great. And she can answer questions, and obviously you represent a lot of people and you know all the stuff that's going on. Look, you're still cheery and happy. You're not old and cynical. A lot of people who get in this business, they just see all the negative and it can just drag them down.
Right.
But I love your positive attitude and saying we're doing good, we're problem solving, and we're getting to be part of one of the most fun and stressful parts of people's lives is helping them buy homes. That's what keeps me excited, is the
too.
problem solving aspect of it. Yeah, it sucks sometimes. Every job is going to suck, but most of the time, there's a why behind all this stuff.
Yeah.
And when you know that, it just gets a lot funner.
And it's the look on your client's face when that deal closes,
Yeah.
and that they're so happy that they've achieved their dream.
Yep,
So
that's great.
what it's about.
Well, thanks again. Thanks for listening to the Clear to Close podcast. Please like, click, and subscribe. Please share. If you'd like to be on another interview, if you'd like to come on the show, please let me know as well. But we'll close with that. And thanks again.
This has been the Clear to Close podcast. Please submit your comments, questions, and topics for future episodes to cleartoclosepod@gmail.com. That's clear 2 closepod@gmail.com or ryanbolton.com. Please like, follow, and share. And until next time, this is the Clear to Close podcast. The views expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of Patriot Home Mortgage, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 299717.